Welcome to this first impressions review of the PHI SCALA 2 Light ENC lightweight two-liner, which I had the opportunity to fly today in size 19 with the Niviuk Arrow harness. I actually had a good variety of conditions to test it out, which was great. Aspect ratio is relatively high compared to some of the other ENC two-liners. I was expecting the SCALA 2 Light to have higher pilot demands. Let's see how it turns out. So starting off on the ground, well, we actually had some pretty challenging conditions on the hill today. The wind was kind of flicking and switching around, and which is a really good test of a glider. So building a wall, the glider inflates nicely and fills with air. Obviously with this kind of level of glider, it does have quite small sail openings, but it does fill up nice and easy. And, the light fabric tends to catch the breeze and want to come up and flutter about, so it requires a bit of management for that. It's got a little bit of a tendency for the tips to come up. Also, the SCALA 2 Light wants to come up and fly even right from the ground when it's breezy. So it was quite easy to get the glider to inflate and come up. The pilot demands I think are about right for the class, which I put as sort of more towards the high C kind of things, similar to the Photon and the Arctic R. Once the glider is up and inflated and you're ground handling above your head, it's really easy. The glider is very solid and collapse resistant and doesn't have a tendency to kind of dive off, to keep wanting to dive ahead of you or to drop back. The stall point is right for the class to me. It's not as forgiving as say the Bonanza 3, which is particularly forgiving in that regard, but I think is at least as forgiving as the more demanding ENC two-liners I've flown, which are the Arctic R and the Photon. And it does have a good tolerance and resistance to stall for the class. So as soon as I took off on the SCALA 2 Light, I just had a feeling of this feels really solid and confidence inspiring. Even though actually when I flew it was quite strong and choppy. First I was like, oh, what's it going to be like with this new glider? It's always like that with a new glider. But very quickly it was kind of, yeah, this glider is very solid and it's communicative, talks to you, but in a very, very solid and uniform way. The glider feels very coherent. It doesn't snake and moving around, despite having a slightly higher aspect ratio than for example the Photon. I feel like it actually moves around less than that, and despite it being an ultralight glider, it feels kind of more solid and coherent to that to me. Probably similar to the Arctic R, which also moves around a bit, but he's kind of got a really solid feeling to it. But probably not quite as solid feeling as say the Bonanza 3 and the Skywalk Mint, which, but particularly the Bonanza 3's got a very sort of solid thing, and that lower aspect ratio of 6.3. So straight away, it just had that feeling of the glider wants to cut through the air and cut into thermals and chop. It doesn't have a lot of pitch movement going on, I found. So I noticed today that gliders were pitching and moving around quite a bit, and I did get to have some of that on the SCALA 2, but I think overall its character is to be quite planted above your head, move around a bit but cut through, and not sort of, there isn't lots of movement like this. I didn't find solid, confidence inspiring and cutting through the air, so that was really nice. And the SCALA Light was very exceptional for an END two-liner, and the SCALA 2 Light is very similar. It's got very agile handling, but it's not quite as, I think PHI have maybe made it just turn just a little bit flatter and more efficient. So the SCALA Light 1 felt like it was trimmed for speed. It felt very much like a racing glider to go fast and for flying in strong alpine conditions, and not a glider for making use of weak lift. And the SCALA 2 Light, I'm really pleased to say, feels more efficient. I think it's not quite as fun as the SCALA Light 1, because it's tuned to be a bit more efficient and turn just slightly flatter and more efficient. Having said that, I'd say that of the ENC two-liners, it's one of, and possibly the most agile and fun to fly. I could really turn around and make use of small punchy cores. Digs in and cuts into the core really nicely. And then another important point is as you go round, you just ease up a little bit on the inside brake just to give yourself a bit of speed, and then brake again, and it just converts that energy around. And you could go from flying straight and level to bank round and going around in a core very quickly. Next, moving on to the B rises, flying on the Bs. Connection on the B rises I felt was very, very good. The Scala Light, the original Scala Light one, was surprisingly light on the B rises. It's by far the lightest I felt on any two-liner. They almost were like brakes. If you're trying to fly actively and react to sudden turbulence and stuff like that, if it's really physical, one, you don't really feel what's going on, two, you can't really react so fast. So I liked that the Scala Lights B rises were very light. There wasn't such a good connection to the glider. I think I guess PHI has responded to that. B risers are a little bit, they're not as light. They're still light compared to most gliders. So I'd say now I would call the pressure as moderate. And I think it's a pretty optimum kind of pressure. And the connection to the glider is much better. I feel a very good connection to it. In fact, I could fly, I felt that even without the speed system on, that I could just hold the rear risers and fly, holding those and fly actively like that. Talking about the speed system, the pressure on it is moderate. I think the travel is quite long for the class, and the acceleration is very good. Potentially the fastest of any of the ENC two-liners I've tested so far. The leading edge feels very solid right the way across. I think right when I had the pulleys locked together, then the glider started to feel a little bit more like it was kind of a little bit on edge, but still very solid. The one thing I can say for sure is that the performance feels very, very good. A definite improvement on its predecessor, the Scala Light, and I'd say it's definitely right at the top of the ENC two-liner class and the ENC class generally. I think a combination of its very good climb rate and very good thermaling ability, and also excellent glide and very good speed and very good speed at glide, are going to make the Scala 2 Light a very competitive glider in the hike and fly races and for general cross-country flying. So having a descent technique, a nice simple descent technique like big ears or the B3s, is very useful. And with the original Scala Light, you couldn't do either big ears or the B3s, so that was a shame. And with the Scala 2 Light, I'm really pleased to say that it does the B3s. So I got to test out doing the B3s. Very easy to identify the lines and pull in the B3s. The pressure was pretty average, but they come in very nicely, and the glider feels very stable with the B3s in, and they weren't flapping about. They were really nice and stable. They gave a good descent rate, and of course worked using the speed bar. Worked with a speed bar, that worked really well. So if you're a pilot that's been flying a C-class glider, or you're moving up from a high B and you really want to get up, and you're an ambitious good pilot, then that's a possible step. If you are moving up from a high B, while I say that, for most pilots you probably want to move up to something that's more mid-C. You know, that's a more logical progression from high B to mid-C. While I say that, I think it's a really good idea for pilots to not be in a rush to jump levels. Yes, there is a performance gain, and yes, it does help you with your flying and helps you stay up and fly further and look like a better pilot. But on the other hand, it definitely increases your risk. So I think it makes sense to take those steps. So I think from a high B, for most pilots, they'd want to move to a mid-C, whether it's a two-liner or a three-liner. It's more probably pilots who've been flying a C-class glider, maybe a low or a mid-C, and now want to step up and get something. They're aiming for more performance in the C-class, wanting to get top performance in the C-class. That's the perfect progression. So this is a glider that you can take on big cross countries and hike and fly adventures, and with the idea of being an ambitious pilot wanting to fly distances in a light package. To my knowledge, it's really the lightest ENC two-liner that exists, and the next lightest would be the AirDesign Volt 4. So my one niggle about it that could be better is that bit on the ground when you're building a wall and the tips kind of getting caught up in themselves. That's my one little criticism of it. The gliders we get to fly nowadays, they just keep getting better and better. And well, that's all from me. Bye for now. Bye.